Welcome to Wired for Good, conversations for a better energy future. The podcast exploring how we can achieve a faster, fairer and more affordable energy transition. Brought to you by Ausgrid, this podcast aims to make the complex energy industry more accessible and address how the energy transition can unlock greater benefits for all Australians. Join us as we bring together leaders and experts to tackle the big questions on what's needed to achieve an energy future we're proud to leave as a legacy for the next generation. Hello, my name's Sarah Aubrey. I'm an electrification and EV advocate. And welcome to another episode of Wired for Good, conversations for a better energy future. Now, joining me today are two experts, people who know things, which will tell me things, excellent, who bring a wealth of knowledge to our discussion. Doug McNamee. Doug, you are the founder and CEO of JOLT, massive fan of JOLT chargers, welcome. And Rob Amphlett Lewis, Group Executive Distributed Services and Plus ES Ausgrid. Is that right?
It is.
Very long job.
It is longer than it needs to be.
Wow, that's amazing. We're excited to have them share their insights on all things EV. All right, so today's topic, electric vehicles, one of my favourite subjects, I have to say. Today's episode, we're diving into electric vehicles, and EVs are crucial for lowering energy costs. But why has the transition slowed in Australia? We'll explore key concerns like home charging and whether our grid is ready for EVs. We will also hear how Ausgrid is driving towards making EVs more accessible. So to kick things off, let's hear from each of you. Doug, what are your initial thoughts on the current landscape of EV in Australia?
Thanks for having me, firstly. So I think the initial sort of outlook of the Australian EV landscape is actually pretty similar to a lot of the other markets. We've started really strong. We've had those initial early adopters jump on. Now's the hard part, which is you've got to get mass adoption. So vehicle availability is obviously a key part of that. Different vehicle types. So as we start to move into some of those bigger vehicles like utes and trucks and things like that, availability of those cars is going to be really key for mass adoption. But having said all of that, at least the data that we've got from our own network is it continues to grow strongly. And, we've seen really, really strong sort of progress throughout 2024 around EV adoption. More vehicles come onto our network every month. The total number of charging sessions, total energy distributed every month grows month over month, which is great. It's really about that sort of middle of the, distribution curve, and those people transitioning is going to be a bigger job because you're coming off a bigger base.
Not what I've read in the press on many occasions. There we are. Anyway, Rob, what's your perspective on that?
Oh, look, I think I agree with much of what Doug said. I think there's probably three things that I think are going to make a big difference. One is the price of EVs, and they're coming down, the availability of various models, and that's getting better, although Australia's been a bit of a laggard in manufacturers bringing their latest models to Australia. The second thing I think is range anxiety, and people rightly have a bit of anxiety about the distance that you can travel with an electric vehicle. Again, technology is catching up and really bringing a lot of those concerns down. Many people who buy EVs don't go on a lot of long journeys, so I think that's been the sort of early adopters as well. And then I think the third and the area where we feel we've got a role to play is in that availability of charging infrastructure and making sure that charging infrastructure is available to all who want to buy an EV. One of the things we've seen in some of the things that have happened in the energy transition, solar PV is a very good example, is that opportunity has only been available to people who own their own homes and have roof space for solar PV. And we worry a little bit that EV adoption is going to be a bit the same. If you don't have access to off-street parking, then really it's going to be much harder for you to make that decision to buy an electric vehicle. And so that's an area we've really been focused on. What can Ausgrid do to solve that problem? Lean in, do more, and we've been wonderfully pleased with our partnership and collaboration with JOLT, who are helping to address that concern. So, but that really for us, I think, is one of the big challenges: making sure that people who want to buy an EV are confident that there'll be somewhere convenient for them to charge when they need to charge.
And I am one of those people because I do not have a driveway, and I don't actually own an EV yet. So there you go. Please solve that problem. I would appreciate it. That would be great. All right. So, Rob, I have a question for you. A key part of getting people's energy costs down is transitioning to EVs. But it does seem to have slowed down. Why do you think that is? And what do you think needs to happen to make the transition faster and easier for people?
So I think going back to my point, I think the availability of charging infrastructure is going to be a big driver of getting the non-early adopters over the line to buy an EV. Yeah. And one of the things that we're seeing is that people who have off-street parking are largely the ones that have been the early adopters. So that cohort of people who are looking to buy an EV, wanting to make a difference, and have off-street parking, those are the people who have electric vehicles. We've seen a bit of a taper off in terms of the numbers of people buying electric vehicles. I think it's about 7 or 8% of new vehicles, electric vehicles. That's not jumped up this year, which is disappointing.
Do you think that some of that is to do with disinformation?
There'll always be, different viewpoints expressed, and I think maybe there is some of that. I wouldn't be able to put a number on it. I do think the inevitability of the EV revolution is clear to everyone. So I think it's a matter of time rather than an if. I think it's a when. And we have a responsibility to make sure that when is earlier, because it's such a big opportunity in terms of decarbonising our energy system and our ways of life, is taking those ICE vehicles off the road and replacing them with electric vehicles, which are increasingly going to be powered by green energy as we see the energy system itself decarbonise. So maybe misinformation. Maybe it's just the ebbs and flows of people's purchase decisions. Maybe the cost of living crisis.
Well, all vehicle sales went down last month rather than just
there you go.
cars.
Cost of living crisis biting. So we don't think it's a long-term trend that this sort of ebb is occurring. We think it's inevitable, but we do think that there's a role for players like JOLT, players like Ausgrid to do more to solve some of those charging anxiety problems that people have.
You mentioned before the range anxiety. It does seem to me the people who complain about that are people who don't own electric cars. And it's not so much the people that own electric cars. And I love that expression, FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt. And I feel like, I think the average Australian drives about 36 kilometres a day. Yeah. And people immediately, I get comments on my social media account saying, oh, but, what if I want to drive across the Nullarbor? I've never driven across the Nullarbor and I have no plans to. And I do worry that we obsess over that. And it just seems to be an issue that's not going away. And I just wonder how companies like Ausgrid or JOLT or people in this industry can try and disseminate that stuff.
I think range anxiety is a bit of a catch-all, obviously, for the distance the car can drive, but also availability of charging. And I think that those two are linked. So even if you're not driving very far and you don't have access to off-street parking, are you able to get on a charger that works? Are you able to understand where those chargers are? How easily are they accessible? And I think range anxiety, is a catch-all for everything to do with that, transition to a different propulsion, being electric, and how you're actually going to facilitate that. So for us, we kind of think about it, as availability. So are there chargers that people can get onto? Do they work? Do you have the response time to make sure that any issues are solved? Are you then able to make sure that people know how to find them? So there's probably range anxiety even within cities, but it's really about access to charging. Yeah. And that's a really important piece. So more opportunities to charge, more highly visible locations. In JOLT's particular case, our chargers are particularly unique and they're positioned in very visible locations, which we actually think is an aid to reducing range anxiety because as you drive around, you can see them, they're available, you see other people using them.
Yeah, they're great.
But I do think there's a difference between charger availability anxiety and range anxiety. So I think if you live in a city, generally you're not doing the really long drives that make you worry about range, right?
No.
What you worry about is charger anxiety. There is a cohort of people who do drive long distances and they legitimately do have a concern about range. But again, the technology in the industry is responding to that, and you're seeing models coming out which really put to bed a lot of those fears that people who genuinely drive long distances have. But I think when we talk about range anxiety in a CBD, in a city sense, what we're actually meaning is charger availability anxiety.
Yeah, true. So Doug, a key concern is, charging availability, particularly at home. How do we solve the problem of charging availability and the convenience issue?
So JOLT is targeting those people, or the service that we provide facilitates people who don't have access to charging at home to charge. So we build chargers in cities at a curbside level that are available 24/7, and they're DC fast chargers. So what we've sort of understood about the market is about 30% of people have to do 100% of their charging on third-party infrastructure in cities. And then even some areas that's as high as, say, 50%. You know, when you think about higher density where you've got traditional sort of like terrace housing and, you know, older apartments, that number is very, very high. So, you know, the way that we're trying to solve that is large-scale networks across, you know, urban environments that are really visible, really easy accessible, low cost to use. So JOLT's model has obviously got a freemium model. So we do 7 kilowatt hours per day per person, after which time you can charge, which really gets the price of energy down to being equivalent or cheaper than charging at home. You know, so that's a really important thing. It's like availability of charging, making sure it works, but then all making sure it's not cost prohibitive, because really those that don't have access to off-street parking are typically, you know, maybe lower income earners. And so making sure that we're not penalising them to transition to EV is obviously very important as well.
I do think there is that issue of fairness when it comes to EV charging. I mean, we're all equal at the petrol bowser. That is not the case when it comes to electric
if
vehicles.
You've got solar rooftop, right? Like,
Or I'm on an EV plan
cost.
and I'm paying cents on the dollar for a kilowatt hour overnight. It just seems really unfair. Then you're paying, 5 times that potentially at a
and
charger.
we've built some products to try and deal with that. So we've got a product called JOLT Plus Flex, which offers off-peak charging. So that gives you really low-cost charging overnight. So if you're kind of benefit the same as somebody would with off-peak charging at home, you know, it's really about how do we bring that same at-home charging cost and experience to everyone else in the city is really what's going to be the key. Like we talked about it at the start. You know, we've got this huge job to do, which is converting those that aren't early adopters to EV. And so to make sure that we do that, it's about how do you build the infrastructure fast enough? How do you make sure it's low cost enough? How do you make sure it's reliable enough? These are like big infrastructure problems that need very large, both capital investment, but also, you know, really customer focused solutions as well.
Do you think we've focused a lot when we were talking about public charging? It seems that there was a real push to do regional charging, thinking about people doing those longer distances, and we've kind of not really thought enough, or only really now that we're really thinking about those, like where I live in the inner west of Sydney, 67% of households cannot charge at home, and it's probably higher than that because people's garages are full of crap and they don't put stuff in there, right? And it's like, to me, more and more electric cars are appearing in my area, but those chargers that we have, they are busy. They're really busy, and that is a bit stressful.
One of the things, I totally agree, and one of the things that we worry about is that the chargers tend to be rolled out at the moment where there are high penetrations of electric vehicles. And so that means that the charger comes once the vehicle's been bought. In reality, it's the arrival of the charger that
should be the other way around,
gives people the confidence to buy electric vehicles. 100%. And I think our hypothesis is if we made electric vehicle charging on the curbside much easier, gave people confidence that they'd come home, be able to find a spot on their street where they could plug in, leave their car till the morning, come back and find it fully charged, then you'd see the rates of EV adoption rise significantly in those areas. And I think we anecdotally we know that, right? When we see an electric vehicle charger go in, you'd start with levels of use in your chargers that were quite low, but soon enough, you know, people buy electric vehicles because they know there's a charger there.
Yeah.
So I think there's almost an obligation, a social obligation on us all to try and get these chargers in as soon as possible in order to give people the confidence to buy those electric vehicles.
I think it's the key.
Yep.
Other than also getting people behind the wheel of an electric car so they see how good instant torque is.
Yep.
The thing I'd say, you know, to add to that is it is an infrastructure problem that people don't bring an infrastructure mindset to. So you kind of look at an electric charger and you say, oh, that's just like a souped up power plug. But really, it's infrastructure in the same way a toll road is or a bridge. And you need to have a very deliberate build before the demand kind of approach to it because, you know, one of the things that we've seen, so we're fortunate enough to obviously operate here in partnership with Ausgrid, but we're in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the US and the UK. And what we've found as like the single biggest unlock is the translation of this sort of 2030 objective to action today. Because, you know, if we're talking about building 20,000 chargers across, you know, New South Wales, like that is huge amounts of infrastructure that needs to be built, you know, and started to be built today because you're doing 20,000 new connections. You've got 20,000, car parks that need to have the bay markings changed, all of the things that go along with that. You need to have this very large scale infrastructure mindset, and we just don't have yet got that ambition. We're still really doing, we'll do 10 charges here, 20 charges there. It's like, no, you need to do 250 charges there.
We need to do 11,000 charges in Ausgrid area alone. And I think that this is exactly right. And in some ways, this is where government comes in and where industry needs to be thinking about whole of system costs. You think about destination charges that go into shopping centres or go into places where people visit. That's often, and JOLT does some very good ones, that is often to try and solve the problem of there not being curbside charges in an area, so people have somewhere to go to charge. Those are faster charges. Fast charges put more stress on the system than overnight curbside charges. So in some ways, the absence of curbside charges may require more fast charges, which put more stress on the system than having lots of curbside charges would. And so in some ways, getting ahead of the curve gives us it brings EV adoption forward and likely gives us a lower overall system cost than responding with fast charges or destination charges behind demand as a result of the fact that people aren't happy about not having charges.
The thing I like about JOLT as well is that we clutter our streets with so many things. There's NBN boxes everywhere, and there's all sorts of things in the way. But you're using something that's already there, right? You're using those big Ausgrid boxes, right? And you're putting the charger there and actually making it look a lot nicer than it did before, which I love. Do you think also there maybe is a bit of a behavioural change with those early adopters we were talking about? Because if you've got free chargers, like those destination ones, say, for example, at supermarkets, I'll just plug in because, it's free energy. And even though they can charge at home, there's a bit of that going on as well. We need to potentially be like, if you can charge at home, maybe just don't charge at those. I feel like maybe there needs to be a bit of behavioural change going on.
I mean, I think early on we were definitely seeing that. I think now we're starting to see, for us, we've got, a lot of demand on the chargers. We've got reservation features now, wait time predictions to try and move people through. So, I think there's probably a little bit of less of that. For us in particular, 67% of all the energy that goes through our network is paid for. So it's not like people are just getting free power and then just moving on. So I think the role that we play is definitely, similar to what you've described, which is the vast majority of those people that don't have access to at-home charging rely on us to do a lot of their charging. We see typically the JOLT customer we see is 5 times a month. Okay. So it's it's a very frequent, very high usage,
and usually utilising the same charger that they're coming back to.
Yeah, so 97% of people charge on one charger.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's really a very hyper-local. If you have a charger within your area, then that charger is what you use to essentially go out and purchase your vehicle. So to what we were talking about earlier, to build ahead of EV adoption is really critical because we know that people actually do it. So much so that we actually know that people download the JOLT app before their vehicle arrives because we've got the data to say you go out and buy your vehicle, you know where your local JOLT charger is or whichever charging network you do. You then download the app, you're then ready, you go, I know I can charge there. Then your vehicle comes and then you start using it. So it's very much the kind of view that we've sort of taken is, you want to have a charger within 1 kilometre of every single person in, every major city to really realise the EV, adoption.
I think I've got to go one step further than that. You talk about 5 visits a month. Really, you, as an EV owner, you need to charge your car no more than once a week, right? And so, for me, it's less about the sort of within 1K. I want to see people having access to chargers on their street. So that
I would love a charger on every street, please.
Spot on, and more than one, because if you have, effectively, if everyone's charging once every 7 nights, you only need a charger for every 7 houses if you get the behavioural stuff right. And that makes an EV just so easy because you're never having to take a decision to charge. You're just getting home from work or getting home from the shopping. You're parking at a charge and you're plugging in, and that's all you have to think about. So, for me, if we can get to the situation where people have the confidence that when they come home, 2 out of 3 times a week there'll be an EV charger available for them on the street, and they can plug in, and ideally they can charge their bill to their JOLT account or to whatever account that they want through any charger, and maybe and ideally even charge it to your own home electricity account. so that effectively you're getting one bill for electricity from whatever charger you seek to use. That's the customer experience that I think will really unlock the EV revolution for everyone and make sure that EV adoption accelerates in the way we all want to see it happen.
And making it easier for people. There's so many different apps. I mean, people. Does Jolt have tap and pay yet?
We do in other markets. We don't have it here. And that's only because it's hard and expensive to do. So very few. The data that we've got is only 1% of transactions on our London network where we've got tap and pay, use tap and pay.
Really?
Well, because to go back to what I said earlier, 97% of people are using the same charger. So you get a much better user experience through the app. And what the app does is allow us to have much more predictive, like we've got self-healing and a whole series of features that operate within the app. So if you get an error from the car or anything like that, you won't notice, but we'll be like fixing it in the background so that you have a successful charging experience.
Yeah.
So you can't do that with tap and pay because you can't see the errors. Having said that, do I think tap and pay may be becoming more ubiquitous? Probably will. It's probably something that we might add to our Australian network, but the data in the UK suggests that it is convenient, but not a huge number of people will actually use it. Because again, if you're thinking about our particular network, we don't see very many visitors, as in people are using our network within their like residential area because we're in cities. If we were on highways, I think totally, right? Like if I'm driving from here to Wagga or something and I needed to go to charging networks that I don't usually use, tap and pay is perfectly fine for that. But being able to kind of do predictive, responses and be able to kind of fix things in the background, that's what the app does.
I think that's hugely interesting, isn't it, that you're getting such a low uptake of tap and pay because your customer experience on your app is so good. And I think that's the evolution of this, is that businesses like yourselves learn what it is that a customer wants and you get good at delivering it, right?
It's a very easy app to use, I have to say. It's very simple. Okay, so the grid wasn't built with EVs in mind, and we've seen some of the challenges that solar has created for networks. I'd like to hear the perspective from each of you on how ready you think we are for EVs. I get that one all the time. Oh, the grid can't take it if everyone goes to EVs. So how might you propose tackling some of those challenges? I'll start with you, Rob.
Well, I think the challenge is bigger than you've just described it in many ways. You know, at the moment, as a society, we have three fuel networks. We have the electricity network, we have the gas network, and we have the petrol network. And effectively, I think we all know that inevitably two of those networks are probably going to come to an end of useful life. You know, the petrol network, because EVs will become ubiquitous, and the gas network is likely to end as we move to fully decarbonised energy system. So effectively, we're asking the electricity network to do what three networks did before, and we're asking the electricity network at the same time to operate in a way that it's never ever operated before. So that's a huge challenge, right? And it's an exciting challenge. It's why I get out of bed every morning, because this is something that is really going to make a lasting change for society. Is the electricity network ready for 100% EV adoption? No, nor should it have ever been built to be ready for 100% EV adoption. That will happen over time, and our business, just like other distribution businesses, will evolve to make sure that the network operates as it should. But in going through this transition, we've got to think about how we do it in the least cost way. And so things like scheduling charging, so that not all charging happens at 6 p.m. when they get their cars home, and we add to the peak demand of the evening. You know, smart technology that allows people to get a better deal by having their car slowly charged, or maybe delayed the start of their charging till later in the evening, or even encouraged to charge during the day. So fitting loads in to where there's ubiquitous availability, or a surplus of solar PV, or when there's capacity in the network, that allows us to accommodate the extra loads in a way that's much more efficient and lower cost. And that's really what we as electricity networks are thinking about a lot. Some of that's about tariffs and making sure we've got charges available. Some of that's about technology and making sure that we're allowing businesses like JOLT to benefit from being thoughtful about when they charge. So there's a number of different things that we're doing in terms of connection agreements and tariffs, and also, of course, we'll be building some infrastructure where there are those bottlenecks. But I'm confident that the industry will keep pace and make sure that we're never in a situation where we're preventing people from charging their electric vehicle. That's the goal.
What about you?
Well, I mean, I certainly can come at it from trying to connect to the grid. So we've done a couple of things, obviously in partner with Ausgrid, is trying to put our chargers in places where there is capacity. So building our chargers, in partnership with Ausgrid on existing Ausgrid infrastructure where there's capacity is obviously the first thing. So trying to place them in intelligent ways within the network. I think what JOLT does as well is we've got a distributed load, distributed demand kind of philosophy. So as opposed to putting large amounts of charges on a single connection, which the grid's not necessarily that well set up for, we actually have lots of charges spread out across an area. So we have individual connections for each of our chargers. And the idea of that is, essentially the grid is energy that flows one way and it, steps down to a certain level. If you fit within that level and you spread your load out across the grid, I think it makes it a little bit easier for connections to come in. So I think it's a two-way street. Obviously, sometimes CPOs can be frustrated about getting their grid connections, but if you work in with the network operators to say, how can we do this in partnership with you or in an intelligent way, I think it makes it a lot easier to speed up the adoption of EV. So, we try and size our chargers, so that they can fit within the existing capacity of the network, place them in areas where there's existing capacity, and then also just making sure that we're, obviously always talking with the network about, here's some charges that are going to come in here. Is that going to be a problem? How should we be thinking about it?
Yes, spot on. And I think the other thing is curbside charges, overnight charges, trickle charges, as we call them occasionally. Those are fairly low kilowatt and they charge a car fully overnight, but they don't put a huge amount of stress on the system. As soon as you get to destination charges where you're looking to get that charge done in an hour or two, and even more when you go into those mid-route charges where you really want to charge your vehicle in 15 minutes, those sorts of charges put a huge amount of stress on the grid. So the more that people are charging at home overnight using the trickle chargers or the AC chargers, the easier it is for the electricity system to accommodate it.
And I assume then putting that in is also a lot easier in terms of...
Much easier, yeah,
Right.
absolutely. So, we've got pole-mounted chargers now rolling out across Sydney. It's relatively easy and low cost for us to hang a charger on a power pole with the connection at the top of the power pole. It's a simple
Say
exercise.
7 kilowatt charges.
7 kilowatts, yeah, generally, yeah. And
Can you explain what a CPO is as well, Doug?
Oh, sorry, a charge point operator.
Thank you so
that would
much.
be a network. So JOLT is a network, like a charge point operator. So they're the people that own and manage the chargers.
Okay, let's discuss why not everyone thinks that networks should play in this space. Why wouldn't this be a competitive service? Rob, what's your take on this?
Well, I think the sale of energy is a competitive market, and we're very supportive of that. Ausgrid's role is providing a connection to the network for your home, and we believe that we have a responsibility to provide a connection to the network for your car. We wouldn't ever propose that there should be a monopoly over the sale of the electrons. I think the competition and charge point operator competition gives great customer benefits, and you see the innovations that JOLT's putting forward and market leading in many ways. What we do think is that there's a role for networks to provide that physical infrastructure on the street that individuals can plug into. Why do I think that we have an opportunity to contribute there? I think that because of what we talked about, the causality dilemma, and competitive businesses often investing after the case rather than before. And I think we can support government in achieving socioeconomic outcomes by investing in those sort of charges in areas where there isn't the EV adoption at the moment, what we want to see it. The other thing, obviously, we run a large workforce that manages electrical infrastructure in the community, and we have 100 years of experience in doing that. And so that means that we can really manage service outcomes and uptime, availability of chargers in probably a much more efficient way than a multitude of different operators could. And I think that social equity responsibility to make sure that these are community assets and everyone in the community has an opportunity to charge when they want to. That's very much akin to what the grid does today. We are a community asset. It's a shared asset that everyone utilises, and I don't think it's a particularly big stretch to move to electric vehicle, the infrastructure that you plug into being part of that, conceived as part of that shared community asset, which is the electricity network.
I think the way I can best answer that is to why we don't do AC charging. So electric EV charging networks are very expensive to run. You need to have a 99% uptime. You need to make sure everyone who visits that asset comes away with power. We've gone down the route that to be able to do that, we need to distribute larger amounts of energy so that we can actually afford to go out and service those assets. So for us, it's very much DC fast charging. It needs to be much more, I guess, energy distribution flow to then be able to service those assets in a preventative way. AC charging is sort of like competing with the 3-pin socket in your garage. And for us, we don't have the capacity to actually do that in any sort of meaningful way because it's very expensive infrastructure. It costs a lot to fix. It costs a lot of money to put out there. You need to make sure that you've got the, cost of capital to be able to afford to do that. And private CPO networks typically are subscale and can't afford to do that. So for JOLT, we've very much gone down a deliberate DC route, 25, 50 kilowatt DC chargers, which, you can essentially charge your car in, under an hour, on the 50 kilowatts, they're certainly that fast. And so it takes scale, it takes low-cost capital, it takes a lot of preventative maintenance to really get that network to do what you need to do, which is why a lot of CPOs have sort of, not necessarily gone a long way in that large-scale public AC market.
So you're actually there's a gap there, right? Because you're basically putting in a charger which is equivalent to what somebody has put as a charger in their home, in their garage. They've got a 7-kilowatt charger there, and that's what they're benefiting from at home.
Yeah, and we wouldn't see ourselves as having a role stepping into the market that JOLT looks after. We really see there is a gap, and who's best placed to fill that gap. We don't see any other player that has the sort of capabilities that Doug was talking about. Experience running infrastructure, scale to run this sort of infrastructure, who can solve that socioeconomic issue.
Would that be a monopoly though, or would other players be able to come in and do that?
Well, we would not have the view that we should do all AC charging, not at all. But we do think that there is a gap where there is an absence or a lack of overnight charging at the curbside, and we have a role that we can go in and put the infrastructure in. But people would be buying their electrons just as they do in their home from a retailer or a charge point operator. They wouldn't be buying them from Ausgrid. We'd simply be doing pretty much as we do for your home, providing that infrastructure that allows you to connect your car to the network.
I feel like those health benefits are not, I don't know, we don't talk about them a great deal. People go, electric cars aren't paying for the roads and all this sort of thing, which is not true, and that's a whole subject in itself. But if you have fewer people dropping dead from strokes and lung disease and asthma and being made sick by the pollution in our cities, that saves our governments billions upon billions of dollars. And so that does have a flow-on effect in terms of putting money back into the coffers and being able to spend it elsewhere, yeah?
It's really huge. So, we operate an EV charging network in London, and there's actually air quality monitors on each of the streets. So depending on essentially how many cars drive down, the air quality varies street by street. And people will actually take different bike ways to get to work following the higher quality, streets, which is hugely, it's crazy, right? Like, it's obviously unique to London being flat and, so a lot of the pollution gets trapped, but it's quite cool.
Yeah.
And so, the EVs, like, a street with more EVs on it is actually like a better quality street to then walk down.
Wow.
And people are now like monitoring it. So it's very cool. So it's the same here. I think, it's probably one of those things that we don't think about as much, as you say, and I don't think we're necessarily talking about it, because I think, what we've always focused on, we as a company, and I think more broadly, is we have to convince individuals, and individuals are obviously going to think about, those things that are important to them: cost of living, quality of life, technological risk, all of those things. So we need to solve them first. But to your point, it is still very real, the long-term benefit that the energy transition and EV transition is playing.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. I think one of the things that the criticisms that people throw at EV as a means of decarbonising is they say, well, the electricity system is largely coal-based, and so I'm moving from petrol to coal. And you know, in its simplest of ways, there's a modicum of truth to that. But the reality is that we have a pretty well thought through plan for decarbonising our energy system, and you're not going to see coal built. Unlikely that you'll see a lot of coal built, and you've got a big plan for making sure that the future generation suite is carbon free. So. Yeah,
and the grid isn't 100% coal.
and it isn't today. I mean, that's absolutely right. So look, I think, you know, if you move from a petrol vehicle to an electric vehicle, you know, you're contributing to that transition, and I think that's a positive thing. And I think it's a positive thing for everyone, just for the reasons Jolt, Doug outlined. Before
we close, I'm going to ask the question that we ask everyone at the end of the podcast. What are the main things that need to change for a better energy transition? I'll start with you, Rob.
So, let's start with electric vehicle charging infrastructure. You know, getting electric vehicles on the road, replacing ICE vehicles is a really important part of getting carbon out of our society. And to do that, as we've discussed, we really need to see more electric vehicle charging infrastructure around people's homes. So giving that access to electric vehicle charging for people who don't have off-street parking. You know, in Ausgrid's network alone, we estimate we need about 11,000 vehicles to give 11,000 chargers to give everyone who doesn't have off-street parking confidence that they'll be able to access a charger once a week to charge their vehicle. So that's a huge challenge, and we think that that the network is really well placed to invest ahead of demand, really spur that uptake of electric vehicles. We've seen that happen where electric vehicle chargers go in, that people buy electric vehicles. So we think there's a real need to get that electric vehicle charging infrastructure into the community ahead of demand, to spur demand, to really reduce our transport-related emissions.
So I think from our side, you know, building large-scale, highly dense EV charging networks is the critical unlock for EVs, you know, across cities. And, you know, translating 2030 objectives down to, you know, 2024 infrastructure rollout plans is the missing piece. We've got this really good ambition, whether it's at a federal level, even at a state level. You know, I think the objective in New South Wales was 30,000 chargers in 3 years. But actually translating that down to, you know, on the ground infrastructure is something that we need a whole of government solution for. You know, actually going and looking at housing density, you know, looking at all the vehicle ownership and going, you know, we need larger scale programs, and they need to be starting now for us to be able to get anywhere near our, like, you know, objectives around energy transition. It's just can't happen fast enough. And I think, you know, obviously the program that Ausgrid's talking about, you know, making a sort of widely available, ubiquitous, AC charging network that everyone can access makes a ton of sense.
I hope we don't get to the point where it's like crunch. We've got way too many cars on the road and we just don't have enough. Where potentially that is a problem. Where
we're already
people
there
do
now.
work.
We install a charger and we'll have queuing within hours of it being
really
built. Yeah, we're already there. Like, we've had to do wait time predictions, we've had to do reservations, we're looking at like a deli ticketing system to actually get people to have a queue, a digital queue. It's a real problem because it just can't happen fast enough. And, you know, there's everybody's involved in that, but you do things like, you know, we still now, building in Sydney, and we've been doing it for years, still have to do like 4-week consultation and, you know, 3 traffic committees to just change one sign to be EV charging only. And you kind of look at that and you go, wow, like, how are we going to do this, you know, at scale? How are you going to do 11,000 of them? It's just going to clog the system. So we need to have, you know, a real hard look at how are the incentives set up within the system? Are there opportunities to accelerate and improve? You know, we definitely know that there's been some success stories globally. It's like, how do we bring the best of those outcomes into Australia to go, we've got a serious, you know, once in a generation infrastructure challenge that we've got to build, and we need to like rapidly accelerate to really get where we need to go.
And that's why I think at Ausgrid we feel that there's a real opportunity for us to accelerate a lower cost and with pole-mounted curbside EV charging, you know, in quite a low social impact way.
Well, thank you so much for coming in today. That was so fantastic. Rob and Doug, thank you for sharing your valuable insights.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.
How can your home drive Australia's energy future? Join us next episode as we dive into electrification of the home and uncover why getting gas out of households matters, the benefits of going electric, and how the energy industry can support this shift. from saving money and reducing emissions to the grid's evolving role in this transition. This episode is packed with insights to empower your journey. Don't miss it. For more info on today's episode, visit www.wiredforgood.com.au. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts so you never miss an episode.